I called her. Okay. Today's date is July 17th, 2024. My name is Doris Lazarus. I'm conducting an interview with Estelle Whitney in Chicago, Illinois, in English. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Estelle Whitney. It was also Estelle Gross was my maiden name, Shoah was my second name, and Whitney is the last name.
Can you please spell your first name?
Estelle.
And your last name?
Whitney, Whitney.
Was that your name when you were born?
No, my name when I was born was Estelle Gross. Gross is my name. I was born with that name.
Can you please spell?
Gross.
Thank you. Did you go by any other names?
Well, I was Shoah, then I was Whitney. So I kept the word Whitney because I like the name.
When were you born?
January the 20th, 1936. I'm 88 years old. I was born in Paris.
Can you tell me the name of your mother's parents, your maternal grandparents?
Well, I never met I never met them, but I think my grandmother was named Mirla, and my grandfather was George, and they were born in Poland, just like my parents.
What city were they born in?
Well, the grandparents, I don't remember the city, but my father was born in Kalisz, and my mother was born in Łódź.
What religion were your grandparents?
Jewish.
Is there anything that you know about them?
Well, they all died in concentration camp. And over the years, my father tried to find information that was after the war. So in the beginning of 1950, he went to Berlin. He spoke German. Find out, if they had information about his family, anybody, and they said, we don't have any, no, which they had, but.
So did you ever meet your grandparents?
No. And sometimes I would say, I wish I had a grandmother that I can tell her all my whatever secrets.
What was your mother's name?
Mindla. Her last name was Ostrowski.
Where was your mother born?
In Łódź.
Do you know what year?
You see, I couldn't remember. But she died, she was 70 years old, in Paris. And she was born in Poland, of course.
Do you know what her upbringing was like in Poland?
Yes, a little bit. She started to work at an early age, like a lot of Jewish people. Also, but she belonged to clubs, like she belonged to a dancing club. My father did not know how to dance, by the way. She had, in fact, she danced a tango. She had a prize for it, And, yes, at a young age, she had an illness, like she could not walk anymore. She was a teenager. And my grandmother, what my mother said, my grandmother would say, oh my God, those beautiful legs cannot dance anymore. I think it was scarlet fever, but she recuperated, And so that was her story.
Do you know what type of education she received in Poland?
Well, I think she was more educated than my father, because I think she graduated from like what you call like a high school. But my
Gymnasium?
Father, pardon me?
Was it called gymnasium?
Gymnasium, yeah. And it's funny because my father had no education. I mean, he did not know how to write, but he knew how to read. He knew how to speak 5 languages, and no education, you know. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, no.
Getting back to your mother,
Yeah.
did she have an occupation in Poland?
Yeah, she worked with my father. They were furriers, both of them.
Do you know what languages your mother spoke?
What languages they used?
Your mother.
Oh, Yiddish was the first language. It was my first language too, by the way. And then Polish, you know.
What are some of the strongest memories you have of your mother?
Oh, I just love my mother. But you know, in those days, you didn't have a relationship like you see on TV. Oh, my mother, my daughter, whatever. No, my mom was very shy. And the thing was, my father was very strict with me, and my mother never took my side. This is the one thing that I'm upset with, is that she never took my side. Because, you know, in the old days, the Jewish women had the husband or the father has all the, yes, you do this and you do that.
Is there anything else you remember about your mother?
Oh, yes. You know, I went back to Paris several times, back and forth. And then my mom always would say, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you," you know. "I'm so glad to see you, kiss you, kiss you." And, okay, so Estelle, I hope you're going to stay longer than last time. It was always the first question. Trying to think.
What did your mom look like?
Really cute, petite. I think she was 5'2". I was a giant next to her. And she had the red hair. Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about your father's parents, your paternal grandparents?
I can't remember exactly, so I don't want to talk about it. But, you know, my father's father, so my grandfather paternal, came to America, believe it or not. Came to America, I cannot remember the date, but there is a record, actually, of him coming to Ellis Island, which is incredible. And he came, lived in New Jersey, and was a lace maker, made lace, you know, in a factory. He stayed 2 years, and he wanted my grandmother, his wife, to come. But my grandmother, you know, she had all those children, so many children, and her sister, so many sisters, so she didn't want to come to America. As a result, he went back, and of course he was taken in the concentration camp.
Did you ever meet your grandfather?
Oh, no, never.
And what about your grandmother, your father's mother?
Mirla, her name was. You know, in the old days, Jewish women wore wigs. So I have pictures of her. I have pictures of my grandfather. And as I said earlier, I wish I had a grandmother so I can tell her all my garbage.
And what was your grandfather's name?
Gershom, who is like George, you know.
What languages did they speak?
Oh, they speak Yiddish, really.
Where were they born?
In Poland. I don't know what town.
What was your father's name?
My father's name, Elzas, which is in Polish, but Albert, when it became French, oh, we call you Albert. It's easier to pronounce.
Where was he born?
My father, yeah, he was born in Kalisz, Poland, yeah.
What kind of education did he receive?
Oh, no, hardly any.
And you mentioned what he did for a living?
Yeah, he was a furrier.
What are some of the strongest memories you have of your father, of what he was like?
Oh, first of all, he was very strict with me. And he was not very nice. In fact, when I came to America, my cousin would say, oh, your father was happy to get rid of you. Something like that, yeah. And it's only, year after, he was really very strong. He was very angry, and he was angry because of Second World War and the ghetto and the Holocaust. And at one point he had gone back to Germany over the years. After the war, he went back to Germany like the early part of 1950, wanted to talk to the mayor or somebody of importance in Germany, in Berlin. But they said, oh no, we don't have any information about your people. It's always the same thing. And he went back twice. And they never said, oh no, we don't have any information. And if you knew anything at all about the Nazi German, they were very, they had every detail someplace.
Were your parents religious when they lived in Poland?
Oh yes, everybody was religious. They all went to the synagogue, and even when they came to France years after, they belonged to a synagogue in the neighborhood. Every neighborhood in Paris had a synagogue. However, after the war, after Second World War, after the Holocaust, he did not want to go back to synagogue. It took him quite a few years to say, I really don't want to go to synagogue anymore. And then a few years after, one day when I went to see him in Paris, he said, honey, I think I want you to take me to the synagogue, because he said, the horrible thing in Second World War, it was not caused by God, it was caused by men. Yeah.
Do you know how your parents met?
Well, my father was a musician. Of course, he was a furrier, but he belonged to an orchestra, played the trumpet. And my mom was a dancer, as I say. So I think they met that way, even though my father did not know how to dance. It was, yes, that's the way they met, through the club. Huh?
What was happening in France? How did they go from Poland to France?
Very interesting. So, as I said, one lives in Lodz, one lives in college. What happened, I'm trying to remember the date, in the late 20s, Poland became very anti-Semite. And they were told they had to leave or they would be shot or something. So it started way back, this anti-Semitism. And so my mom and dad, they were able to find it's a good story. Well, they had to leave their town, but they were able to find a young man who was handicapped with a wheelchair, and he took them as they took care of him, and he was able to go on a train. So they went through Germany and another little town I can't remember, and they landed in Paris. They had a distant cousin who was in Paris, and said they could stay with him. So that's where they stayed. And until I was born, so I was born about 6 or 7 years after my mom, and 6 or 7 years after my parents were married.
Do you know what was happening in Poland? Why they left?
It was anti-Semitism. That's why it started. Hitler invaded Poland, the first country. And this is what they have, the ghetto. You know, ghetto is a Yiddish word, by the way. It was adopted by other people, if you know what I mean.
Did they ever talk about any of the persecution
Oh,
in Poland?
they talked, yeah, but in Polish, so I couldn't understand a word.
So what were they doing once they got to Paris?
Well, they were with this young man who I think was a distant cousin. He was able to find them a job. They could find a job because they were furrier. I mean, not rich, but, you know, furrier in the third degree, as I call it. So they were working in one little room, which reminds me that later on when Second World War started, and we wound up in a very little room the same way, years after. And then, okay, here's the story. So after 7 years, my mom was expecting me. And so the night, because I was born at midnight, so when it was a time for my mom to be in labor, my father got a taxi, because that's the way it used to be, taxi, not ambulance. Taxi, and he said to the taxi to take him to such and such hospital. Well, the chauffeur took them to this hospital, whatever name it was, and so I know they are not allowed to do that anymore, but they have your name, address, etc., and religion. So my father said, "Oh yeah, we are Jewish." Well, this lady at the front desk said, "Oh well, you know, I think we don't have any more beds, right? And I'm sorry." So my father was so mad. Anyway, and it's very cold outside. So my mom waited for him until he found another taxi, and he told the new taxi man, chauffeur, to take my mom and him to another hospital, and told him the story where they would admit him because he was Jewish. And this chauffeur said, "Oh, I know exactly where to take you." And he took them to this hospital, this Catholic hospital called Hotel Dieu, God's Hotel. And there was nuns. You know, it's funny because years after, I had this same type of experience because I graduated from Catholic University. So it was years apart, of course. So it was, and then they find a little apartment after I was born. In fact, this apartment I lived when I was a baby until I left for America. It was the same apartment.
During the years your parents were in Paris, before you were born, did they talk about other persecution?
No, they spoke Polish. I didn't understand a word.
What made them decide to leave the apartment and to leave Paris?
Well, Second World War was full force. Anti-Semitism started. In fact, when I was going to little school, I lived in the middle of Paris. When I was going to little school, what they call nursery school in Paris, I had to wear a Jewish star. Can you believe it? Big like my hand. I'll never forget it. And so were all the Jewish people in Paris had to wear a Jewish star. And inside it would say Juif, which means Jewish. And I was called, that's the first time I was called a dirty Jew. I was 5 years old. And during that time it was really terrible until my parents decided to leave Paris. Certain stores would not sell you food, or the buses or the taxi did not take you. You had to walk everywhere. And so those were already difficult times. And this is when my father said, "Oh, we cannot stay here anymore." And it's really aggravating because they left years ago for the same reason, really. So now was the job of finding somebody who would brings them to what they used to call the zone free zone, which was at that time the south of France. Okay, nobody would believe that, the Nazi soldier would cross France, And so it took them a while to find, with friends, not Jewish friends, but Christian friends who were very helpful, to find them somebody who were willing to, somebody who were willing to help them to go into this safe place. But nobody knew exactly where, it could be, this was the south of France, they were told, but they did not know which town, nothing. And of course, I'm sure that my father gave them a little money. How do they call the smuggler? Smuggler, yeah.
What were they able to take with them from your apartment?
Well, I talk about. I tell my friends who survived not Holocaust, who survived a hurricane or a tsunami, whatever. What do you take with you? And they tell you, go right away, leave, whatever. I still remember it was in the summertime. My mom put a winter. Oh, Mom, it's too hot. Winter. And a small suitcase. And why a small suitcase? Because they couldn't take very many things. They couldn't take their clothes, the clothes for me. And this is why I know about my grandparents, because my mom had all those pictures, her parents and grandparents' parents. So this is why I know of them. Uncle, cousin. There was, like all Jewish people from the other countries, they were very religious and they had a lot of children.
So what city were you in?
Oh, it's a village, actually. Village. Castiones, it's called. Castiones. Very small village. So the fellow who helped my parents introduced us to the farmer who said he would help us. He would give us a little room, and this farmer never heard of being Jewish. He had no idea what it meant. In fact, my father always says that this farmer, I forget his name, he would say, "Oh, what is your arm? It's the same color as my arm." He thought, or maybe he was green or whatever. And so we lived there, one room. Oh God, I always went up with a one room with no facilities, no running water, no stove, no toilet. So, remember, I was like 6 years old by then. My job was to go outside and pump the water. It was a well, we had a little stove. My mom could cook, whatever. There was no electricity, I remember, but we had like candles and things like that the farmer gave us, and also he gave us food. Now, nobody had any money. The farmer had no money, my parents had no money, but what they did, they gave us food, and my father became a farmer. Believe me, they were not very farmer, in those days, a Jewish farmer.
Did you have your freedom at that time?
Well, I remember, I was like 6 years old. I thought I was my freedom because Mom would always say, well, don't wait. Don't come when it's dark or something like this, which I thought, well, it made sense. I didn't like to be out in the dark anyway. I went to school. It was one-room school for all the kids, depending on their age, one room. And also, and I made little friends, but we never talked about being Jewish. I didn't even know what it meant. And so certainly they didn't know what it meant either. And I went to church, Catholic church. My mom got me a little cross, I remember, and I know all my prayers in French. Yeah, so it was not like terrible. I did not feel that we were in a prison. And we stayed there. Should I talk about the resistance? Okay,
we will get there soon.
So, if you go in a school and it's only one room, your spelling is terrible, because it's phonetically, you know. The teacher did the best she could. Yeah.
Do you know if the people that your parents met while they stayed on the farm knew they were Jewish, or did they hide their Judaism?
No, they didn't meet anybody. They didn't meet. And my father never talked about Jewish except when we arrived and he told the farmer, Jewish, and the father didn't even know what it meant, I told you. So, no, nobody knew about Jewish.
Did you have enough food?
Yeah, well, certainly, it's the farmer. Yes, I remember my mom making omelette, and eating chicken, that type of thing. The farmer was wonderful. I don't remember his name.
Did your parents have to change their identity, their names?
Not then. Nobody worried about the name.
You mentioned that your father was in the resistance.
Right. Okay, so we've been there in the village for about 5 years before the war. And so everybody knew everybody in the village. My father knew, and the farmer, of course, but the friend of the farmer, the police people, everybody knew everybody. I don't even know if there were maybe 200 people living in the village. And so we were, according to my dad, they had the radio. Everybody met at somebody's house in the village who had a radio, so to listen to the news. So we knew that the Nazi German were advancing now close to the south of France. So this is why the resistance, I think you know what it means. You're not a soldier, but you have the right to bear arms, and you are recognized by like a soldier. So, yeah, and even the police people were friends, and they would meet. I remember my father said, "Don't touch the gun here," yeah, whatever. So they all would meet at somebody's house, and decided what they're going to do. And so one night, my father and his companion heard that the Nazi Germans were advancing towards our village. And it was really upsetting. So, you know, the village had a bridge, a little bridge that will take you from the village to the next city. That was the way out. And so they found out that the Nazi Germans were close to the bridge. And so they all had the arms, whatever. And sure enough, those Nazis were going to cut us off, so we had no way to go out. So they, just at a good time, I think it was timing, my father and his companion were able to capture those guys. And my father spoke German, so here it was. I think there were maybe 8 or 10 soldiers, German soldiers. They were taken to the prison of the village, kept there until they decided what they should do. And the police, of course, the police was in. Everybody was together, resistance. And then my father was a translator. And then, so they were maybe 1 year kept prisoner. And do I tell you about what happened? Should I talk about after the war, what happened? Okay, so here the war is over. Oh my God, people are singing, dancing, incredible. What do we do with the prisoner? So the policeman who became friends with my dad said, you know, Albert, that was his name, Albert, let's go and have a meeting with President de Gaulle, who was a president then, and ask for a meeting. And so we both take the train, we'll get there, Palais d'Orsay, I think it was called, you know, where the president lives, and asked for a meeting with President de Gaulle, and talk about Monsieur Gros saved our village. He spoke German, and he talked German to those prisoners, and we think he should be compensated or something. Well, the compensation was interesting because my father, my parents came to France with no papers. You can relate to the people here who have no papers and come anyway. And so President de Gaulle, President de Gaulle decorated my father with a medal, and he asked him a few questions, and he says, "So which country are you from?" Blah blah. And my father said, "Polish, but I never became French because there is a quota. So many French people can become." And so he became a French person. I got a paper. Mama, the same. Mom became French. And so they became French citizens.
Before we move on to after the war, while your parents were on this farm, were they getting news of what was happening to the Jewish people?
Yes, because we had that one radio. And the radio was only one channel, President Roosevelt was the president in America. So we had somebody translate what was going on in America, and that the American soldiers would come to France, if possible, to save France. That's the way it happened.
You mentioned the liberation, the end of the war. What do you remember about that?
Well, first of all, my father went to Paris. My mom and I, we stayed in Castagnès because we did not really know what was happening. And French people, in those days, nobody bought a house or an apartment. So when my father came to Paris, in the same neighborhood where we lived, the apartment was sealed. In other words, you could not get into the apartment. And people that used to live in that address, we kept the same address, Rue de la Corderie. And so with the help of the police from the neighborhood, they unleashed, I think it's a word, unleashed the door. You were allowed to get into your apartment, but the apartment was totally empty. The Nazis that lived there, not only they stole light bulbs, but all the furniture, because remember, in those days, you didn't have credit. So when you have enough cash, you paid cash. They stole everything, and I thought, maybe I can find my toys. No, they stole all my toys as well. I often wonder, how do we restart life when there is nothing? There is no money, there is nothing. So some people don't know that, but the synagogue from the neighborhood, they would help to get clothes, things like that, like they do now in church, in the synagogue. And then there is also the radio, but there is no way to communicate. There is no, you know what I mean. So the way that the synagogue people put little notes on the door of the synagogue. Albert Gross is looking, in French, Albert Gross is looking for his brother. Everybody put little notes. And of course, no, my father was never able to find any of his people. But it's like, this is the thing that breaks my heart, because how do we restart?
Was your mother able to find any surviving family?
No, she didn't, Nobody. Nobody. It's like horrible when you think about it.
Do you know what happened to all the family?
Well, when my father went back to Germany for some information, we assume it was in Auschwitz, because Auschwitz was the first concentration camp, especially for people that lived in Poland. So it was terrible. In fact, my father was very angry, even angry with me. He was not really a nice person, because there was never any closure. You know, when you say closure, there was never any closure.
What physical condition were you all in?
No, we were okay. Well, I had very skinny legs. My father said, "Oh, you're in French. It was, oh, legs like a haricot vert, like green beans."
How were you received by former neighbors?
Well, everybody went back to their own apartment. So some people were Jewish and some people were not Jewish. I can't remember, but it was, nobody called us a dirty Jew. No, that was over. That time was over, you know.
So what were your parents doing?
Well, I don't know how they restart, because the synagogue, as I say, they were helpful, and my father still had his profession of furrier, so did my mom. So they restarted that way, I assume. But they had little money.
Did you find any other Jewish families who had to leave and then came back again, like
No,
you
you know,
did?
my father was my father was incredible for this. He found people from friends, you know, not his people, but people, good friends. Yeah, that was a miracle. That's all.
Did you go back to school in Paris?
Yes, I had to say the school. As I said, I was a terrible speller, but my school was in the neighborhood. In fact, I was a very good student.
Do you remember what subject you liked the best?
Oh, no, you go to school, you get all the subjects. You know, French school is very strict. No boys, only girls. So you concentrate on studying, you know. Yeah.
How long did you and your family stay in Paris?
Oh, once my parents lived in Rue de la Corderie, they stayed there. They stayed there forever. They stayed there when I left for America, they were still there.
When did you leave for America?
1956. I was 19 years old. Same apartment.
Why did you want to leave?
Well, by then I had my son Larry, which, you know, and it's interesting because I never, even though during my teens year, you know, when you're a teenager, you're not really smart, basically. But everybody, all of my friends were Jewish. It was a Jewish neighborhood. You know, you didn't even think twice. Yeah, all your friends were Jewish. But the reason that I decided to go to America is because of all the things to think about. I didn't want my children to be called a dirty Jew. Now, I don't remember, because I didn't have this experience, you know, since Second World War. So when I came in this country, my son Larry was 6 months old. I didn't speak English, you know, and I was 19 years old. I said, excuse the expression, I had balls, you know. Oh, should I tell you a little bit about when we got to, okay.
What was the process like to emigrate to America?
What was the process? Is that what you say? Yeah.
Was it difficult?
Well, no, I belong to this organization called the Abonim. They helped you to go to America if you want to. They will help you financially. Denmark was a big place also where they would send you. And Larry's father had an uncle that lived in America, so that made it easy for us to get papers. But when you are an immigrant, you need somebody to refer you, to certify you, whatever the word is, and they help you financially. And yes, I, to be honest, did not want to come to America. I was like, Israel. I wanted to go to Israel. And why? Because the Jewish religion has been so strict, you know. Now the Abonim, Jewish Israel, it was like free. You didn't have to be married. The kibbutz, very, very attractive to me because I was already very independent. I could have, my child would have been, you know, raised by the kibbutz. Now here we go, to you know, the people in the kibbutz. But I was married to Larry's father already, and my father was so strict. No, you don't go to Israel. You go where your husband is. So this is the way we landed in New York. So I landed in Ellis Island. I have a little picture, you know.
How did you meet your husband?
Oh, Leon, yeah. He was Jewish, actually. I had gone with a friend of mine. So I met him. I was 18 years old. Got married at 19. But the wedding, the marriage did not last too long. We were too young. But anyway, I went on vacation with a friend of mine just for a weekend. She had some family in Deauville. That's just like close to Paris. And, you know, I have a very large birthmark on my legs. And I was wearing little shorts. And so he was there, Leon. He was there with his brother behind me. And he started to talk to me, in French, of course. And he said, oh, can I meet you someplace, blah, blah. So just to get rid of him, I said, oh, yeah, I'll meet you there at 8 o'clock, whatever. I never showed up. But we stayed there for a few days. So we were walking on the beach, and you could see my birthmark. He remembered it. That's the way I got hooked up with him. Yeah, we were married or not 2 years maybe.
Was he Jewish?
Yes, yeah.
Was he a Holocaust survivor?
Yes, because, but we did not talk about the Holocaust, you know. But yeah, he had it. Oh, it's his story, yeah, or it's Larry's story, you know. Yeah, it was funny because he also lived in my area, in my neighborhood. I mean, really, things happen for a reason. No, he was a nice guy, but he was, you know, he was a nice guy, but he was too young. You know, young women, even though I was 19 and he was 20, younger, you know. So this is why I divorced him, yeah. He did not want to divorce me, but we had Larry, so they had a relationship, him and Larry, as adults, you know.
Can you describe your voyage to America?
Oh, my God. Yeah, so, you know, I'm sure you can understand that the ship, we call him the ship, was a lot of immigrants and people like this, but nobody spoke French on that ship. And it took 9 days to cross the ocean, Atlantic Ocean. September, the waters are really rough. Really. And so here we go. Nobody spoke French, but because I have Larry with me, he was 6 months old, the nurse took care of Larry. She spoke German, so I could speak a little Yiddish, you know. Anyway, so I go into the cabin, and as I go inside, bunk beds, no pretty bed or anything like that, bunk beds, and nobody spoke French. So as I enter with the baby, the nurse had given me a laundry basket. That's why we put Larry in the laundry basket. And those two ladies on the bunk bed, older women, said something in but I understood what she said. She said, they say, oh, a baby, that's all we need. Hmm? And the younger woman, she spoke English, so I did not understand very much. But I was very lucky because this nurse took care of Larry. Larry, in France we still have formula for babies, but she started him with baby food. He was in heaven. And then because the water went up, horrible, I was seasick for 9 days. Seasick, you want to be dead, really. And but he slept all along because it was like the water went, So we arrived at Ellis Island after nine. It was terrible. That's why, my children sometimes want to say, oh, Mom, we wanted, as a present when I graduate from college, we want to get you as a present a what do you call it? A cruise. No, sir. Not me. Even Larry, who was a sailboat. No, I have this thing, and now it's different, of course.
Was Larry named after anyone?
Well, actually, Larry's, his name is Laurent. It was a French name. No, it was named. I love the name Laurent. And then, also, when I found somebody to take care of Larry, because I worked right away, so Mrs. Meyer, I still remember her name, took care of children. It was very rare then in New York, because women did not work. Women did not work. They stayed home and took care of children. But I was lucky to find Mrs. Meyer, and she took care of a few children. And so I come to pick up Larry in the evening. I worked all day, and I said in English, of course, I come to pick up my kid. His name is Laurent. And she said, oh, we don't have a name like this here. Yes. And one of the little boys said, yes, Mrs. Meyer, we called it Larry because we couldn't say Laurent. That's the way it started.
How did you learn English?
3 months. Didn't go to school, nothing.
What were your first impressions of America?
Well, I watched TV, first of all. And because I thought that would help me to understand the language. But I'm very proud to say that I never go to school for it. The thing is, the most difficult thing when you have problem in a new language is, the newspaper, usually you don't even realize the newspaper don't make full sentences, like, oh, Second World War was over. No, they don't put it that way. So it always bothered me. But I knew about 1 year that I understood everything in English, yeah.
Where did you live in New York?
Brooklyn.
Was it a Jewish neighborhood?
Yes, it was, yeah. But not like... Oh, so here's another story. So I was in I have to find my word. Okay, when I came to America, I brought everything with me because on a boat you can bring everything. So I even brought Larry's baby carriage with me. So one day we had been there just for a short while. I took the baby in the carriage. Prospect Park is that where I lived, and I thought, let me walk down the boulevard. And I touched Larry's face, and his face was red, and that scared me because I thought, oh my God, maybe he has a fever. So I started walking on this sidewalk, and I thought, oh, here is a pharmacy. It looked like a pharmacy. So I went inside, it was a pharmacy, and I say, the first thing I always say, parlez-vous français? No, this is Brooklyn, they say. No, we don't parle français. But I talk with my hands, and I showed the face red, and all the signs that the baby had a fever. And he says to me, you speak Yiddish? Oh, I say, yeah, a little. So he pointed the finger at the pharmacist, and explains that the baby had a fever, and he directed me to a doctor on the down street, 2 street down, and the doctor gave me some medication or whatever for the baby. I don't even know how I got myself in. I mean, you know, like, and you do not speak in the language, basically. But you are a survivor. Yeah, and then little by little, I find a job, you know.
What was your goal?
Oh, well, I come from working parents, so I was a working person. I wish I had found a rich person, but I was not after a rich person. I worked, in those days they had agencies that you didn't have to pay an agency to get a job. But some agencies, yes, you know. So I found this agency, don't ask me how. And I explained that, I was a seamstress, which is what I was in Paris. I was a seamstress, work in factory. And so they said, oh, well, we have somebody for you. And they sent me to another place in Brooklyn. And they were looking for a cutter, that was the word. And so anyway, so I go to this place, took 3 subway or whatever, it's still in Brooklyn. And I could speak. You know, I said, I'd like to find the owner. I forget what I say. A young man, actually, he was a boss. So I said, well, I'm looking for, the agency sent me, I'm looking for the job that you advertise. Yeah, what job, he says. I say, I am a cutter. Oh, what? And he looked at me up and down and he said, I thought you were a dancer. I did not understand it was a joke, because it's the way I dressed, you know. I said, please, I need a job very badly. I said, but it's a man's job. It's a man's job, miss. I said, well, look, I'll work for you 1 week. You don't have to pay me. And he hired me. I worked there for two years. And it was a man's job. You know, it's like, you can cut, remember I was a seamstress, you can cut that many dresses, 25 dresses, with a bandsaw. It's a special knife who turns. You put your hand in front and you cut. Yes. So that was my first job. Mm-hmm.
Did you continue your education?
Oh, not yet. No, I was a working person. We didn't have any money. You lived check by check, you know. This is the way it was in those days. First of all, it was in the early 60s. You know, to me, or to us, this was for rich people, you know. It was for rich people, education. I didn't need an education, I needed a job. So, and then I cut a piece of my finger. And so my boss was really upset. And so I quit then. And this is when I left Leon, Larry's father. And somebody said, you know, Estelle, you should go to Florida. You can get a divorce really fast there. Plus, it's very warm there. I took Larry and we went. I went, you know. And actually what it was interesting is that they had a factory in Miami Beach, believe it or not. And why did they have factory? Also the factory like I did in New York, because the union, garment union was very strong. Garment union started to invade New York. And you know, when they have the bosses, they had to pay. So a lot of those people, Jewish people with this kind of factory moved to the south of, you know, to Miami Beach. And they would say, oh, Estelle, and I had a job right away, you know. Oh, Estelle, did somebody approach you from the union? I said, no. Anyway, so, and I worked there a few years. And I was there, yes, and I met Ed, my second husband, in Miami Beach, you know.
What is his last name?
Huh?
What is his last name?
Whitney. He's Whitney, yeah. He was an artist. Okay, so I met Ed Whitney. by then we had moved, Larry and I, we moved to Miami Beach. And I had an old friend that lived in Miami Beach, so we had a little apartment right away, you know. Anyway, so this other friend of mine, because as I said, I found a job right away at the factory, you know. And so this friend of mine who worked with me, she said, you know, Estelle, I want you to meet this man. He's an artist. I love artistic people. And he's going to Europe shortly, and he wants to ask you maybe a question, museum, whatever. So I met Ed, and I thought, oh my God, this is the ugliest man I've ever seen. Because he wore those glasses that are really, it's a style now, you know, those dark glasses. Very tall, I love tall men. Anyway, to make a long story short, with Ed, he married me. He never went to Europe. And this was a story. But, you know, we had a very difficult relationship. I was married with him for a long time, but he was a disabled veteran, and he had these bouts of what they call now PTSD. But then they call, now they used to call anxiety neurosis then. So, but I didn't know anything about anxiety neurosis. I didn't know how to deal with it. He was 12 years older than I. And so it was very difficult, but I don't know, I must have, you know the word chutzpah? Because I kept on going to work. Okay, I'll give you an idea. When I was married with Ed, so I had the 2 children later on, my grocery list was $20 a week, food, right? We were poor. Larry says, Mom, I don't remember being poor. Then I must have done something good, you know. And so he was working on and off. And he had a little disability, you know. So that was Miami. And I left him for a while because I could not stand this, whatever. And I took the kids and went back to Paris for a while. And he kept on calling me. I don't know if you remember how many dollars a phone call cost. Because long distance was long distance. Anyway, he called me so many times and he said, look, I found a new job and it's in the Virgin Islands. And I didn't know what the Virgin Islands were. I thought it was the Pacific or whatever. Anyway, so I came back with the kids. And I love St. Thomas, the American Virgin Islands. Oh, God. And I don't mind black people because everybody was black, you know. Because in Europe, we don't have this kind of situation with black people. Yeah, with Jewish people, yeah, but not black people. Anyway, so we lived there about 6 years.
Before you tell me about the Virgin Islands,
Right.
you mentioned you went with kids. So did you have another child?
Oh yes, when Ed and I got married, 1 year after we were married, we had Daryl. And you know, Daryl and Larry are only 3.5 years apart. But it was 2 husbands.
What was it like in the Virgin Islands?
Oh, I loved it. First of all, the weather is very clement. One hurricane we had over the years. You know, it's a small island, so you know everybody.
Was Ed Jewish?
No. He was nothing. He didn't have any religion.
Were you raising your children with a Jewish education?
No, until Larry moved here. No, until Larry married Ellen, and Ellen is Jewish. Then he became Jewish. But Daryl does not believe in God and all this. That's another story. They're so different, but they were raised together.
What was it like to live in the Virgin Islands?
Well, I went back into being a seamstress. The weather was wonderful, as I said. You go to the beach every day. The water was incredible. One side you have the Caribbean Sea, the other side you have the Atlantic Ocean. It's interesting for the climate. The trade wind, that's for me. The trade wind, that's why you don't perspire over there. Trade wind is. So Larry and they all became certified scuba diving. And Larry has that, and also, so we had gone to a party or something, and they were selling a lottery ticket. So we bought a ticket, and I won the little boat. Can you believe it? Sailboat, big from here to there. Since then, Larry is an excellent sailor. He has a boat here, you know. So it started there. And we knew everybody, as I said, and a lot of gay people moved there because it's open, you know. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, Scientology was there. If you know anything at all about Scientology. And so when we moved to St. Thomas, I've never driven before. So I had to learn how to drive on the left side of the road. And my teacher was Mr. Husband, I still remember his name. He was black, but he taught everybody on the island except his wife. Mm-hmm. So, oh God, I love to drive. I miss not driving, really.
Did you ever talk to Ed about your Holocaust background?
No. And he never told me about the Second World War either, because he was a Marine. He went to Iwo Jima. We never talked about it. We were so consumed with our being poor and trying to find a job. We never went deep into our relationship, really. I was married with him for 17 years. I still didn't know the man, you know.
Did you want to continue your education?
Oh, I didn't even think about it then. But after he died in an accident, I said, I have to change my life. That takes really chutzpah, because I was always, you know, a seamstress. But I wanted to change my life totally and do something with an education which I never had, basically, because I never graduated from high school either. And Larry encouraged me, actually. And I had my feelings for nursing, something to do with nursing. I wasn't quite sure what. So I started to do my research. I wanted to, well, there is things missing here. But anyway, I wanted to do my research to see how I mean, I am not educated, I have never graduated from high school. Who could take me? And so I applied to 4 universities, and not even like university. And so I was 37 years old, and so not only I wanted to know more. It's incredible. I had this incredible brain, which I didn't know I had. So 4 universities, well, we're sorry, Miss Whitney, but we have no financial aid for you. Of course, they had no financial aid at 37, and they were looking for 18-year-old for financial aid. So the 5th school, I said, they will never take me. 5th school, I applied, and they accepted me. Catholic University, I couldn't believe it. Of America, yeah. And I know how it went, because I have in my head, you know, when you give financial aid to students, there is a group of teachers, and they say, oh, Estelle Whitney? Pff, never again. But you know what? Okay, so English is, she never graduated from high school. I love that story. Never graduated from high school. English is her second language. She's poor. She is a parent. And you know what? She's Jewish. I always say this or that. Oh, I did incredible grades. 7 sciences. 7.
What did you get your degree in?
Oh, nursing. I had a Bachelor of Science degree of nursing.
Tell me about some of your jobs in nursing.
Well, I work in many hospitals. I was telling, until I tried Dr. Fauci, it was very difficult to get into a research hospital. So I had maybe 4 or 5 different. You know, when you're hired, it's medical surgical. This is where they need most of the nurses because they're so short staff. So you name it, you know, you start IVs, all kind of things, medical surgical. And it's hard because they ask you to do extra shift and all that nonsense that could be nonsense. But then a friend of mine who worked at NIH, National Institute of Health, is the name of the research hospital in Washington, D.C. And 10 pages to fill out. Where did you work? Blah, blah, blah. Right? And I had 200 patients, all young men, HIV positive. They couldn't find any nurses that worked with those, you know, those patients, because then it was the beginning of this incredible, terrible illness, and it was a death sentence because they had no protocol, no medication, no nothing, and it was just a death, really. So you took care of the patients the best you could. You know, when you do research, I don't know if you know, if people know that, you don't do it on the person. Hitler did on the person. You did it on their blood. You draw blood, so you do blood day and night, you know. And then you look at the blood to see what's going on there. And so I worked there for about 9 years. And then I couldn't stand it anymore. I said, my God, I wanted to be a nurse very badly, but I did not sign in for that. So one night I was very busy, and it was quiet, because I did the night shift. It was quiet, and I said, oh, and I had a National Geographic magazine. And I said, okay, let me see. I want to go there. Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah, I lived there for 20 years, you know.
So to be clear, you moved from
Then I moved
St.
again.
Thomas
Yes.
to
Washington, D.C.
and that's where you worked for Dr. Fauci?
Yes, yeah. But then I had to enroll in school, you know. And Larry was very encouraging to say, oh, yes, Mom, you know, you have to go back to school. But it's incredible how you don't know your brain cells.
Then you moved from Washington, D.C.
From Washington, D.C. to Charleston. And then Charleston, I really love Charleston. The weather is nice. I love the people. And I work in a hospital, a regular hospital, you know. And then a regular hospital for a while. And then I did, my supervisor said, well, you know, Estelle, you always wanted to do children. I said, well, I work with children, but yeah, labor and delivery, nursery, pediatric, those two, until I get sick, you know. But it was great. I really loved taking care of the baby.
When did you tell your children that you were a Holocaust survivor?
I don't even remember. Because little by little, I started to write things about who I was. So I did not use the word Holocaust, because I had a very difficult life with Ed. So I talked about that. No, I'm not a writer, but I love to write, you know.
Were you in constant touch with your parents in Paris?
Oh, yes, yeah. I went once a year. I went maybe 20 times. And one time, or 2 times, I went with Daryl. And now Daryl speaks French. Not Larry, who was born in Paris. Daryl speaks French. Yeah, and it's good that when my father was alive, they all, every time we go back to Paris, they all like to speak with my dad. And that was good because of the relationship between Ed and the kids, which was so difficult. So it was great. Oh, he speaks French. Yeah. I think he was 7 years old, and now he speaks French. Where did you get this vocabulary? You have, you know?
Did your children get married?
Well, Larry's married to Ellen. They've been married like 30 years, I think. Daryl has a girlfriend that he's been to also over 20 years, but they don't live together. He likes his freedom, so to speak. But they are together, you know. They don't go with other people, that's what I mean.
What religion is Larry's wife?
Jewish. He became real Jewish when he met and Ellen's parents were wonderful. When they were still alive, I met them a few times. They were very Jewish.
Do you have grandchildren?
5.
Can you tell me the names of Larry's children?
Oh, yeah. Well, Larry is the one that has 4 children. So Remy is the oldest, 42 years old. I have a 42-year-old. Remy, Zoe, who had the restaurant. Zachary is the only boy. And Rachel, 4. And Daryl has Alessandra. I love them all. Mm-hmm.
What are your grandchildren like?
Independent. I wish I could, but Zoe lives here, so I used to be closer to Zoe. But they're working. They don't have the time. Take a plane, go to see Grandma for a day. Yeah, it's really not exactly a dream.
Did Larry raise his children with a Jewish education?
Well, Larry was married first with this witch, I call her. Then he married Ellen after that. After that, yeah, so... and the children go to synagogue, when they come to visit. But I don't think that they are religious, if you know what I mean.
Did you ever have any contact with the farmer who helped your parents?
No, it's so strange because once in a great while, I think, oh my God, this man saved our lives. Why is it that we never went back? I asked my father many times, and he, for whatever reason, he didn't want to go back, or it would bring bad memories. I don't know, but he never told me. And I wanted to go.
In this country, have you ever experienced any discrimination?
Oh, yes. So I was in Charleston, in fact. Charleston. 20 years I lived. 10 years I was in Charleston, 10 years when some incident happened. I had gone out for lunch with a friend of mine, a brunch, yeah. And then we went back towards my apartment. And what do I see on my apartment? It's written on my door, Dirty Jew. I couldn't believe it. I was so upset, so angry. I say, no, not again. No, so you see, it's like, it will never be over. People hate this or hate that. We don't even know why. Or when I worked in factories years ago, and people knew that I was French, they would say, how can you be French and Jewish? That's a big one. How can you be, you don't look Jewish. How am I supposed to look? Yeah, that was big.
Are you aware of anti-Semitism today?
Of course. The news, if you don't listen to the news, you're deaf, What aggravates me, because big university, like Columbia and all those big universities, there is so much anti-Semitism. Do they know anti-Semitism? Do you know Holocaust? And it's a younger crowd who knows nothing, So I just, you read the news, you listen to the news, and it's not good.
Do you
I s-
often think about the time that you were in Paris?
Oh, yes, of course. I was telling
Andy?
Andy, when you are an immigrant, and so you come from one country where you spoke French, whatever, and you move as an immigrant to another country where you don't even speak the language. You have to learn how to speak English. And it's never resolved. I was telling Andy, it's never resolved. Your heart is broken. It is. It's because, and when I used to go back to see my parents, before I got sick, and then it was always like, oh my God, I don't know, I go back to America. I went to America, I go back to France. You know, it's never resolved. And I'm sure immigrants feel that way. Even if you leave a country because of war or because of, you know, a difficult time, or you are poor. You know, I left, with Larry, I left 1956, because Larry was born in 1956. That's a little over the end of World War II. Because you could not find an apartment. 10 years after, you could not find an apartment. You couldn't find anything. I continued yes, I had a job, because I did not stay too long in Paris. When I go to visit, maybe three weeks or something like this. And one year I stayed a little longer because my mom was really ill, and I wanted to stay a little longer with the kids. And so I went to see my old boss when I used to work in the factory in Paris. And I talked to him, and he said, "Oh, Estelle, will you be interested in working here? Because you speak English. I'm looking for a bilingual salesperson." It was hysterical. So, yeah, it was that store, it was great because that store started to cater to young, high-fashion kids. I worked there. That's why he needed for me to speak English. Mm-hmm. It was fun. I really liked it a lot. I wore cute clothes and everything. This is where they all spoke French from way back years ago.
Have your experiences affected your religious identity?
What do you mean?
Do you believe in God?
Oh, it's difficult to say. You know, I talk to God every day. It doesn't mean that I believe in God a certain way. You know, a couple of things happened in my life when I really say, oh my God, those things would have never happened if I didn't believe in God. And it's true, there's two things.
Do you celebrate any Jewish holidays?
Well, since I've been here, yeah, but before, no, nothing. I was married all those years with Ed, nothing. But here, every time Larry and Ellen, they invite me. You know. We just did Passover not long ago with a friend of Larry and Ellen. It was great. And I love Passover, actually. It's one of my favorite holidays.
Do you read books or see movies about the Holocaust?
I try not to. It's too hard. But I'm a reader, so I read a lot of books over the years. But now it's just confined to science fiction. You know, that's the best. I mean, I'm serious. Years ago, the best writer was Asimov. He was the best, and then he died. So I have not found great, not yet. But Remy, my granddaughter, she tries to find me books that she knows I would like.
Do you remember the trial of Adolf Eichmann?
No, I was too little, yeah. Plus, it was not televised like it is now, every 2 seconds, you see.
Do you want to show the tattoo on your arm?
Yeah, but it's not, it's survivor. I'll be honest, it is not related to the Holocaust. It's related, and I say that very gently, it's related to, I survived Ed Whitney. That's what it was. Because it was terrible, a terrible relationship. And my back was to the wall. I don't know if you ever, domestic abuse. My back was to the wall. I had no money. I had the children that were young. I didn't drive. I was stuck. But I get back. That is why at 37 years old, when I was a widow, I decided to change my life.
What does the state of Israel mean to you?
Well, not very much, because I told you, first of all, before I came to America with Larry, I wanted to go to Israel. I mean, I was gung-ho. I was, a Zionist and everything. And it would have been wonderful for me, the way I was in my religion, that it was, religion is free, but you still don't have to be married. I told you that earlier. You still don't have to be married. And of course, now it's terrible what's going on. But I mean, then, we're talking about years ago. Because Larry is, 63? Well, he's something in the 60s. I lose track.
Why did you come forward to tell your story?
Well, a lot of people have asked me to tell my story. Not a lot, a few people. And I think I mentioned to you, this organization, I don't know how they found my name. Anyway, they approach me and they say, would you like to tell your story about Second World War? This is where I start to think about it seriously, because I don't even know if I could have remembered stuff. And but those people were thieves, So I was really disappointed. And Larry searched who those people were, and he said, Mom, I think those people were liars. Oh yeah, they say they were, they're calling me from Israel. Oh yeah. All this nonsense. So finally, my final letters to them, I thought it was them. I said, I am embarrassed to say that you are Jewish. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm Jewish for people like you. Oh yeah, I love to write letters like this, I'm a great letter writer to people that, it's one of my forte.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yes, I want Trump. I'm saying it. I want Trump to disappear. I don't want him, because they say if he's elected president, we are in bad trouble. We are really, excuse the expression, up Schitt's Creek. But what do you do with two older men? I said to my friends, French history, Louis XIV, he was a king until he was 82. And he was a good king. I love history. That's why I could go back.
What would you like to tell future generations that will be watching this interview?
Well, this is not the first time, this is not the first time that I wrote segment. And when I wrote segment, I can't remember when I started, and I sent a copy to all the kids. And, well, I don't know what they would think of me. I hope it's something good.
Do you have a message for future generations?
I don't want it to sound negative, but it really doesn't look very good. And you want to leave, where would you go, tell me? Originally, a few years ago when it started, the turmoil, Canada, we all talk about Canada. In fact, I took Larry a couple of months ago, I think it was, to the French embassy. Now he has dual citizenship. Not me, they took away my French citizenship. So it's a big question mark. I'm not a mind reader. All I can tell you is that, yes, and I think of my grandchildren. It's the younger generation. What will they go? How will they go for a better job? And yet, on the other hand, they talk about the AI, AI. So there will be different kind of jobs. Yeah, I think about it, like, you think about it, for example, oh my God, I want to go to the movies. Well, you better be careful. Oh, I like to go to the mall. So I don't want to be negative, as I say. It's like, I hope it's going to be good. And then we want to go to the moon.
Thank you, Estelle.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I didn't cry. I thought I would cry. Yeah. Okay, this is my two sons. Daryl is the oldest, and this is Daryl, the youngest. And this picture was taken in Miami, where we lived in the big house. So this is a picture of me, believe it or not. I could hardly walk. This is in Paris, in the public garden. We were there. I was with my mom. I was all dressed elegant. I have to point because
I wonder if it would help if I put that one on the phone for Estelle.
okay, on the extreme right, it's my father. Next to him is my mom. Next to mom is me. I think I was 1 year old or something. The rest is people, friends of my parents. And above my father is my mom's sister. And next to it is a friend.
Where was this picture taken?
This was taken in Paris, in the apartment where we lived. Oh, is it ready? On the extreme right is my father and his two brothers, who unfortunately died in concentration camp. But the one is behind the picture there is their name, and I can't remember their name, but it's written there. There were 6 brothers, actually. Funny that this picture is me. Oh, this picture is funny because it's my first husband, Leon, and me, the day we get married. I cannot see very much. Oh yeah, I see it. Oh yeah, thank you. Okay, this is, can I talk now? This is me on my bicycle, a Daryl, in front of a house in Miami Beach, and I have a basket in front of the picture. This is where because I didn't drive in those days, and I would put Daryl on the basket. Can you see on the extreme right is my mom. She had short hair then, and she was a dancer. And I was still in Poland.
Ready?
This is my father in Poland. It's interesting because Jewish men were not allowed to own territory, garden or whatever, but they were allowed to wear a soldier uniform. I think he was 20 years old. He looks just like Larry. Incredible.
Did we
all
just
of
do
them.
that one?
Yeah, that's the one.
Everyone has.
He was a soldier also, but I don't remember where.
Who is in this picture?
Oh, my father, I'm sorry, yeah. It's my father in this picture. but I don't remember where. I know the other one was a soldier in Poland, but this I can't remember. Yeah, that was in St. Thomas, the American Virgin Islands.
Who's in the picture?
So me, and the children, Larry and Daryl. Okay. I see Daryl over here, and Larry here. The rest are little friends. Birthday party, something.
Which one is Daryl and Larry?
Daryl here, and Larry here.
So on the left, bottom row, and top row.
Yeah. You know, they were so blonde. You see, Larry looks like me and my father. And he's Daryl. Oh, this is the girls. Well, let's see. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this Remy, Zachary, no. Rachel, Zachary, Remy, Zoe.
And they are your?
Grandchildren, yeah. Because it's priceless. Huh? What? Now this is a little boy, friends of my grandchildren. This is my granddaughter. The one that is not with the group.
What is her name?
Alessandra. Okay. It's Daryl and feeding Alessandra.
It's an honor, trust me.
Yeah, my mom and my dad. I can't remember what year. This is my very first nursing cap. In those days, you had to wear a cap. And I used to walk really fast, and every time I walked fast, I would lose my cap. So that was my first, 1982. Okay, this is me. I cannot remember exactly how old I was, but I think I was in my early 50s. And because I lived in so many places with beaches, I don't know if it was St. Thomas, American Virgin Island, or Florida, Miami.